Hey everybody! Okay, so while making the Leonardo video, I took the time to watch the whole 2014 Ninja Turtles movie, just to get a handle on the personalities of the new Ninja Turtles and make sure they were handled in roughly the same way so that the Leonardo video still made sense. And actually, I don't watch a lot of movies now. I suppose my database in terms of major movies filled up around maybe 2008 or so. So there's not much to gain from watching newer stuff, and when I do watch new movies, I spend most of my time thinking about why I do or don't like them, which is fun, but not really the way you're supposed to watch. Anyway, when I do watch a movie though, I always end up finding a lot of things that make for great material in terms of talking about why I thought that movie did or didn't work for me, which I like to be reminded about. Obviously, though he didn't direct it, for example, it's a Michael Bay movie, and in the process of writing some notes about that, I realized there's so much to say about him that that's going to be its own video also at some point in the future. But beyond that, I have a lot of stuff that I want to talk about now. Mainly that there's something actually pretty significant with the 2014 Ninja Turtles movie, which I would point out if it were a book or a script that I had to analyze, and which I think is subtle or interesting enough that you won't hear about it in reviews of the film, but is significant enough that I'm pretty sure it played a part in my reaction to the film, and probably yours too. And it probably made you enjoy it significantly less than you otherwise would, which is that the movie, in short, has what I call scale problems. Now, we'll talk about where that comes from and, in general, this common phenomenon, which is a way that movie makers and writers can end up putting all their effort into movies, because, make no mistake, they are incredibly hardworking people, but still come out with things which are quite flawed, and which led me to develop some pretty cool tools which I think help to avoid that. But just to be clear first, we'll have to talk about the plot of the movie, at least in very general terms, in order to outline what I'm talking about. And that does not mean, though, that this is going to be a critique or critical review of the Ninja Turtles movie. I don't have anything against critics. I have some that I really like. But I don't intend this channel to be one that tells you what you should or shouldn't like. Everyone has different tastes, and if your tastes are uncommon, I'm actually more interested in understanding your point of view than in trying to tell you to change it. Because uncommon phenomena are often where we get the most valuable data. They help us define the edges of our theories and where they do or don't work, and how we may be misunderstanding those theories. So, instead, rather than tell you what to like or not like, I'd rather focus on telling you why you may like or not like what you do. I think that's a more rare and interesting thing to provide, if we can do it. Anyway, we're talking about the 2014 Ninja Turtles movie, which has what I call scale problems or scale issues. Basically, I don't want to give away spoilers from the movie. I will have to talk about it. But I think it'll be fine because, to me, spoilers are things that reveal how a story plays out instead of how the story is set up, or things after the first act in normal screenwriting language. And this isn't going to give away too much of how the story plays out. But anyway, in the movie, essentially, all the characters are connected. There aren't a lot of characters, which of course is a good thing for making the movie understandable, but they all go way back, as we say, in terms of having affected each other's lives when they were much younger, including particularly April O'Neil and Splinter and the Ninja Turtles. She's connected to them before they ever meet on screen. And that is the core of the issue we're going to talk about. It was done for a reason, I believe, subconsciously or for spoken reasons by the filmmakers. We all use our own terms, but to me, they probably did it to increase the confirmation feeling from the story, making April a better person for having helped the Turtles when they were normal animals, and thus making you want her to succeed and survive more, and thus making you happier if or when she does. But in the process of implementing this and going for this, I think the filmmakers actually cost themselves more than they gained. And this is where the scale problem comes in. You see, by making the characters connected, they did something that harms the impact of the story to the audience. It lowers our level of interest and blunts the impact of what we see. This is because they actually reduced the amount of impact that the events we're seeing are having in the world of the story. You see, we all have an instinct that causes us to pay a certain amount of attention to things we see, to give them a certain amount of weight or feel a certain amount of value or importance. One of the major things that triggers this instinct is the number of people or the percentage of our group that's involved or affected by what we see. This means that we naturally pay much more attention to a fight or accident that is changing everything in our village or community than we do to a simple quarrel amongst some friends or family members. In the Ninja Turtles movie, this shows up as an actually lessened impact in the events, due to them only affecting a small group of people who already know each other. Traditionally, in the Ninja Turtle stories, April is a reporter who doesn't know about the Turtles and is drawn into the events in terms of meeting them and befriending them by covering them and the crimes they stop. This means that the fight between the Ninja Turtles and the Foot Clan, or the Ninja Turtles' actions, are having a ripple effect that is going all over the city. You can actually see this idea played out in the opening of the original series of Ninja Turtles movies, which have a montage of shots of New York with a reporter's voiceover talking about the crime wave hitting the city. And I believe also in Ninja Turtles 2, which shows people eating pizza all over the city as a result of the Ninja Turtles' popularity. Instead, though, in the 2014 movie, which starts out with a similar situation but then reveals connections amongst the characters, we lose this sense of scale in what we're seeing, and thus we don't get the powerful feeling that comes from observing the society changing or people's lives changing. The actual scale of effect loses its width in how many people we're seeing get affected, and it actually doesn't gain as much as it would seem in the depth of the effect as well, in terms of someone's life being affected to a certain degree, since April's life doesn't change nearly as much by meeting the Turtles and Eric Sachs and the Foot Clan, since she was involved with them already. This actually weakens the movie's ability to show a strong message as well, since the way we get those lessons most strongly when watching a movie or following a story is in watching the message or idea change someone's life. Instead, here, we're left with having a character simply verbally state a lesson, which doesn't work nearly as well, but which is probably a topic for another day. One of the key things to recognize here, though, is that this decision by the filmmakers was not made willy-nilly. They didn't simply throw out one thing without a purpose. There was a gain made by making this change in the characters' histories, which we mentioned is the confirmation. But the key point is that what was gained, the slight confirmation by showing other good traits in April, does not make up for the loss in enlightenment. Enlightenment, you see, is actually a deeper and more powerful feeling than confirmation. Not everything you get from a movie gives you the same strength of effect, nor the same level of good feeling. You can look at each effect actually, compare it to the results, and actually end up ranking them, which is what I've done myself with a handy chart that I'll be making videos about later. In the case of enlightenment, as long as you aren't turned off by the story due to being confused or insulted and so on, enlightenment is actually the most powerful effect you can see happen or feel as an emotional response. A quick example of this is that the most impactful books in the world are the ones which give people enlightenment. Ideas that answer their questions, satisfy their curiosity, and so on, at the widest possible scale, namely books like the Bible and the Quran. Belief aside, that scale, the creation of the entire universe, the origin of time, your entire purpose in life, and so on, is enlightenment as big as it can get, which should help underline this idea. Confirmation, things which underline or affirm or validate what we already know or want to be true, is also good, but not nearly as powerful as enlightenment. And thus, sacrificing enlightenment to gain some confirmation is actually an overall harm to a story's effect, which we can see once we can rank the various emotions. So that should indicate that it's a pretty handy way of viewing and understanding things. And it helps us understand how filmmakers can all be working very, very hard on their products and still get varying levels of success, as we've said. The effects achieved have to be balanced in a specific way where the less powerful or more momentary emotions are delivered without harming the most powerful ones. But there will be plenty of time to focus on that concept later. In dealing specifically with the Ninja Turtles movie, a way to do this most likely would have been to set up the situation so that you show good qualities in April without having her know the Ninja Turtles already. She is, after all, a reporter, and I assume she's following the crime wave in the city. So there's lots of things she can do to show, believably of course, that she's a humble and hardworking person who has good morals, or any number of things that we'll like. The key here, though, is that you can gain that confirmation effect, making us want to see her succeed without sacrificing that feeling of scale in the Enlightenment. Now, in regards to this concept and where it comes from, it actually in some ways is pretty standard as a part of discussions that you'll hear in story meetings at studios and production companies when they're considering scripts or giving feedback to writers. I picked up on the idea personally when I was interning at one. I had the good fortune, you could say, of having a desk that was next to the assistant and within earshot of the producers and an executive. So I was able to overhear a lot of these things. And I had the insecurity to think that if I didn't know and understand these things, it would hurt me and I wouldn't be able to achieve my goals. So whenever a term would come up, I would, quietly of course, make it my own mission to try to understand what it meant in the clearest and most functional way I could, so I could try to avoid it or do the thing well myself. In this case, the term in question was small. Such and such is a small movie. It feels small, not theatrical. We can't make it. That has to change. Now, a lot of times when these words are used, they don't always perfectly represent the idea or problem with the story, and that's important. It is to be expected because producers and executives simply don't have the time to study writing to the depth that writers do. So they develop enough of an understanding and terminology so they can generally reference what they want and leave it to the writer to implement. Thus, when looking into small, I realized that what felt small is what we're bringing up here, the effect of the events on the people in the story. And the whole thing, in terms of the events, needed to be bigger. You see, even if the audience doesn't realize it outright, we actually expect a certain amount of effect from our movies, and we get a feeling of disappointment if it doesn't deliver. And that vague, is that it, translates into us having a more negative feeling about the movie, no matter how we describe it or what we chalk that feeling up to being. Filmmakers on these types of large budget movies also understand instinctively, or otherwise, that they need to try to deliver that much feeling too. But it can be missed due to some misproportioning in how they focus their efforts and in what they deliver, which the idea of scale problems helps to reflect, at least in one form. Now, as you probably noticed, I took the word small and relabeled it to something else for my own purposes, even though the term scale isn't actually that much different. But I think that using our own terms helps us to know what we're talking about, since we can assign our own meanings to our own jargon without feeling like we're guessing at what someone else intended. This does of course mean that you can end up in your own head speaking your own language. Like, for example, when thinking about the issue with the Ninja Turtles potentially being changed from mutants to aliens in the movie. This was rumored really early on, and the fans got extremely upset about it. So much so that it's actually referenced in the movie when April gets asked if the Crime Stopper she's trying to track down might be aliens. And she says outright, no, that's stupid, pretty much talking directly to the fans, saying that they wouldn't do that either. But when thinking about the actual reason why people got so angry at that, it's something I would refer to in my own private planet as an exo-confirmation violation, which probably sounds like something Willy Wonka would make up. But as long as you understand enough of what your own little words mean, you can hopefully communicate them to other people in normal English and it'll be helpful to everyone. In this case, that term, exo-confirmation violation, simply means that people like to believe in the real world outside of the movie's story that the movies or books they care about are worthwhile. They like something because it is genuinely a good thing. And if a filmmaker or adapter comes in and throws out fundamental aspects of the story, it makes it seem like the story is not important or not good enough on its own, which goes against or violates our belief that the things we like, in this case the Ninja Turtle story, are already good. When making adaptations like these, I think filmmakers always have to walk a line between reproducing the content of the property in order to not violate the audience's need for confirmation of these things, and reproducing the effect of the property, where things that worked in one medium, like comic books or cartoons, would look too silly or hard to believe in live action. And thus you need to change those things to make sure they still come off as well as the comic book or cartoon did. When you do it right, you get things like the 1989 Batman movie, which changed Batman's suit in a manner that worked well enough that it became the standard for every Batman movie that followed it, and ended up being expected by the fans. And in the case of the Ninja Turtles movie, they added a lot of new details to make the Turtles seem more like they were walking around in real life, which initially annoyed a lot of fans for these reasons, but I think they did soften towards it eventually, and I think it'll work going forward. Provided, of course, that the filmmakers are always working on the story aspects too, which I'm sure they are. And that's that for that. There's obviously a lot more to say in regards to Michael Bay and his style of filmmaking, and what makes it controversial in some ways while being profitable in others. That will definitely be its own upload at some point in the future. But in the meantime, I hope you found this interesting, and stay subbed to the channel because I've got plenty more coming up. Thanks.